enjoying a very vibrant academic career, as well as his role in NATO. For most of us academics, you know, it's hard enough being just an academic, so I'm always very impressed that Jamie continues with his various teaching commitments and manages to save the world at the same time. In NATO, before he was Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges, Jamie was Director of Policy Planning between 2005 and 2010. Between 2003 and 2005, he was Deputy Assistant Secretary General for External Relations. From October 2000 to March 2003, he was the Director of Information and Press. And from 1993 to 2000, he was spokesman of NATO and Deputy Director of Information and Press. And I think most of us remember him from that time when during the NATO intervention in Kosovo, Jamie was a very familiar face on our television screens. And I was very excited that somebody I actually knew was on the television every day. His academic positions, as I said, are numerous. He's a professor at the Collège d'Europe in Bruges. He's a lecturer, I'm very pleased to say, at my old university, the University of Kent, at the Brussels School of International Relations. And he also came to give us several talks while in Canterbury, while I was at Kent. He's an associate professor of international relations at the American University in Washington, D.C. He was also an adjunct associate professor of international relations at James Madison College, Michigan State University. And he has many academic pursuits at the moment. He's a regular lecturer and conference speaker on NATO and European security affairs, on public diplomacy and political communication and lobbying. He's associate editor of Europe's World, the Brussels-based journal on international affairs, and he has been an external examiner on many PhDs for the LSE, the University of St Andrews, Department of War Studies, King's College, University of London, University of Kent, and University of Iceland as well. And I remember that we were actually on several juries for PhDs at Kent together, and on my MPhil you were also my external examiner. So this is indeed a very long-lasting relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Jamie Shane.
Good, many thanks. The only thing we haven't done together yet is get married, but there's probably not much time for me, but hopefully still time for you so that we can do that. No, it's been a fantastic friendship, Gunnar, and I'm always so pleased that you invite me back. I also want to start off by reproaching you, though, for one thing, if you really don't mind, but in a friendly way. This is the second time you've invited me here. And I noticed that although it's my second visit, my photograph is not up there on the wall. You've got David Miliband for some unknown reason, but obviously you decided there's only one plane, there's only space for one Brit. So if you want me to come a third time, you know what you have to do. I want to see my photo, of course looking 25 years younger than today. I can supply you with an old photo, but up there. No, it's a pleasure. I must confess, ladies and gentlemen, that I do get sometimes a bit hesitant when I'm invited for a second appearance, because it can be either one of two things. Either you were so brilliant the first time that you have to give a repeat brilliant performance, according to the motto of BAU there, which I imagine stands for brilliant and useful, right? It's got to be brilliant and useful. Well, you were so bad the last time that you've sort of taken pity on me and decided, out of friendship, to give me a second chance to make amends. But whatever it is, I'm delighted to be back today. The first thing is that we in the Alliance, as all of you know, are facing for the first time in our history a multitude of threats coming at us at once. The old paradigm, which was a fantastic paradigm, that the adversaries were comparatively easy, a quick air campaign would solve your problem for you. You only had to deal with one crisis at a time. You know, fortunately, Milosevic, who would take himself out of the scene before Al-Qaeda was cropping up in Afghanistan, so you had the luxury of winding down one operation and then ramping up another, or that you could rely, ladies and gentlemen, on the forces of international law or globalization or economic interdependence to solve your security problems for you. In other words, you could put your security, or you could entrust your security to what others were doing, rather than the effort that you needed to make yourself. Those days are over. And paradoxically, we may even look upon them with a certain degree of nostalgia when you think of what we face today. A multitude of different challenges. If we solve one, it doesn't really help. The others will still be there. This is not like the Cold War, when the collapse of the Soviet Union makes virtually all of the strategic issues in the world, at least for a period, disappear. None of them have a quick and easy air campaign as the solution. At the minimum, it's going to take 20 or 30 years of hard effort before we will be back in the situation that we were in just 4 or 5 years ago. It's going to take now effort by us. In other words, we will have the security that we're willing to buy, that we're willing to invest in. Our success will largely depend upon our own efforts. We can no longer put our faith in what others are going to do. And for the first time in NATO's history, ladies and gentlemen, we have to do collective defence and crisis management at the same time. It's interesting that in a week where NATO defence ministers have been meeting in Brussels to look at the state of our readiness action plan for the collective defence of our eastern allies, the European Union has been launching a new operation in the Mediterranean to deal with the migrant issue that was mentioned a few moments ago. And the EU today has 16 common security and defence operations ongoing. The United Nations also 16 operations, largely in Africa. We have a coalition of 60 countries against ISIL operating in this neighbourhood. So we might want to put all of our efforts back into balancing Russian power and collective defence in Eastern Europe, and that might seem to many allies as the most immediate or urgent task, but the truth of the matter is we're going to be having to do a lot of things at the same time in a lot of different places, and somehow find not just the resources but the coherence to make that work as a strategy. Where are we? Well, we've made a good start in the East, at least. You've probably seen from the NATO defence ministers the last couple of days that we've had a very strong commitment from the United States, from Secretary Ashton Carter, that the US will provide whatever resources, logistics, airlift, equipment, manpower, and womanpower, that we will need to ensure that not 1 inch, to quote, not 1 square inch of NATO territory will be challenged. That's very reassuring, particularly when you consider that a lot of people were doubting to what degree, with the pivot to Asia and the problems in the Middle East, the United States would really be able to put a lot of effort behind collective defence in response to Russia's aggressive moves. So that's very reassuring. We agreed to increase our NATO response force to 40,000 troops, to have a permanent reserve that we can draw on for rapid responses. Just a couple of days ago, the Secretary General and Sakur, the Supreme Allied Commander, were in Poland, seeing the launch of the new NATO Very High Readiness Force, currently led by Germany with Norway and the Netherlands. So, just 1 year after the Wales Summit, less than a year after NATO's Wales Summit, this has gone from paper to be a real up and running force. We gave Sakur what he was asking for, which was delegated authority to be able to call up these forces, to train them, to put them in the right place at the right time if they were needed. While at the same time, we also agreed that we need to speed up NATO decision making at the political level and improve our intelligence, improve our situational awareness, be able to spot aggression at a very early stage so that we will get the benefit from a military point of view in having very high readiness forces by making sure that they are not just usable, but will be used when we need. We have agreed to set up a number of small NATO commands we call nephews in the NATO jargon, NATO Force Integration Units, NFIUs, nephews. And indeed, the South, I'll come to this in a moment, in this area, is possibly a place where we can do the same. And 18 allies are currently increasing defence spending. Now, it's not everything we would like, because you know the NATO agreed target is 2% of GDP for defence, and we know that at the moment only 5 allies are meeting that particular goal. And indeed, last year, strangely enough, last year, notwithstanding the increase of tension in Europe, the demands on our military, Russia's annexation of Crimea, defence spending went down by 3% on average in NATO. So we still have a lot to do. But at least 18 allies have now put this phenomenon in reserve. And some, for example, like Germany, acquiring new frigates, acquiring the Riyadh's air defence system, Poland investing in Patriots and in French helicopters, France reversing 25,000 cuts, personnel cuts in its armed forces, again investing in ships. So many allies are now finally putting in train the investments in the programs that we're going to need to have the capability. In demographics, in social change, in the legacy of colonialism of the past, of course, in ethnic issues, and so on. None of these things, therefore, can be solved, unfortunately, so quickly. And we have to be mindful of that. An approach to the South requires NATO to be supporting others as much as leading itself. It requires a very clear definition of what our interests are. I would argue that our interests in this region are, first of all, to support our allies. Turkey is clearly one of the key ones. We're doing that, as Gunnar rightly pointed out, with the deployment of the Patriot missiles for some years now already. But secondly, it's to support those pockets of decency. There aren't many left, but those zones of stability, of democracy, of moderation, which are still there, and to prevent them from being contaminated by the radicalism and the extremism on the outside. It's to protect our energy supplies, absolutely. There's nothing wrong in talking about our interests. It's to protect our lines of communication as well. And of course, in terms of migrants also, to prevent us from being destabilized internally from the blowback of the crises to the south of our borders. So there are a multitude of different threats. And unfortunately, they're likely to get worse before they get better. If you take, for example, terrorism, the State Department in the United States has just come out with its annual report, which shows that whereas 12 years ago there were 750 recorded acts of international terrorism, last year there were 38,000 recorded acts of terrorism. This was more than double over just 1 year, and 13,000 individual attacks of terrorism. What is interesting is not just the figures, which are getting worse, is going up, as well as the number of terrorist organisations. The State Department counted 33 more terrorist organisations in 2014 vis-à-vis 2013 previously. Now, if you look at ISIL, and I've heard of ISIL a lot, when we started looking at ISIL in 2013, it had about anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 fighters, mainly in Syria, but with a small group of several hundred in Iraq. 2014, that figure, according to the CIA, was about 32,000 in all. We now estimate there are 100,000 fighters in ISIL, of which about 1/3, around 30,000, are foreign fighters. That is an incredible increase. Take Boko Haram, for instance, in Nigeria. 5 years ago, Boko Haram was basically under about 5,000 individuals. Today, calculations, 20, 25,000 fighters. And I don't even need to speak about Al-Qaeda as it's reconstructed, or Khorasan, or other groups, Jabhat al-Nusra, which have followed maybe less spectacularly, but a similar trend. This is a worrying business model that we're going to have to deal with. That said, let's also remember that international terrorism, even at these higher levels, still only accounts for about 7% of global deaths from violence. There are about 510,000 a year, and most of those still are from organised crime and homicide and so on. But still, it's a worrying trend that we have to deal with. Then let's take migrants. UN last week came out with its annual survey on migration. It's now running at 60 million, which means that a year, 60 million displaced people. That's up from 50 million the year before. Turkey has become, as you know, the world's largest recipient of refugees. You've now overtaken Pakistan. Your 2 million equates to 1.5 million in Pakistan. The bad news, by the way, is last year, only 126,000 refugees and displaced people returned home. That was the smallest number since 1983. So more people leaving, fewer people returning home. If you put all those refugees together, those 60 million, and they were one country, they would be the 24th largest country in the world. That means that 42,000 people are leaving every day, or 1 in every 122 people on planet Earth. They're not all, of course, coming our way. We've seen a phenomenon, of course, with Burma recently, in Asia and Australia as well. But there is no doubt that the centre of gravity is the Syrians. They constitute nearly 1/4 of that total of 60 million. And indeed, already, we've seen not just the waves of refugees across the Mediterranean into Italy, about 55,000 this year, but the Greeks are now, with all of the problems that Greece has already, from the bailout and the banks and the need for stabilisation of the euro there, the Greeks also are now facing a massive migrant problem. 48,000, not far behind Italy, 48,000 so far this year, mainly into islands like Kos and Lesbos, Chios, and so on, which means that the EU has had to establish a Poseidon operation alongside the Triton operation in the Mediterranean. We've got now a number of different conflicts. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen now has blown up since the last time I was at this university. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process also seems not to be going anywhere for the time being. So we are dealing with a very contagious mix of problems in the south, and it's not helped also by contributing factors like climate change, which we now understand was a major driving force of the move from land to cities in Syria and impoverishment, as well as, of course, the impact of climate change in the Sahel and in Northern Africa. We're dealing with water disputes. It's not by any strangeness that one of the first things that ISIL tries to seize are dams in Syria and Iraq. He who controls water controls the local population, and obviously makes people who are outside that control have to leave where they are. Water is now going to become a very major focal point. And of course, demographics. The population of Saudi Arabia is now composed of 50% who are under the age of 25 as well. And these contributing factors will not cause crises, but they will certainly put stress on fragile states that are already having to deal with a lot of problems. So clearly, we in NATO have to have a strategy for the South. And we need to make sure that it catches up with our strategy for the East as quickly as possible. What are going to be the elements? This is what I'd like to talk to you about today, the strategy for the South. Rule number one is we've got to make sure that all of these things that we're doing for the East, rapid response forces, improvements in command structure, improvements in intelligence gathering, and situational awareness, are applicable to the South as well. The troops that are currently exercising in Poland have to be able to operate here, or in Italy, or Spain, or in North Africa, or the Middle East, as required, equally soon. That means that we have to make sure that we have a program of exercises in this region. And in that respect, I'm pleased to announce that we will have in Spain, Portugal and Italy in October, November, the Trident Juncture exercise, 25,000 troops, which would be the largest so far that we have had. Which will also be a way of certifying the NATO response force for 2016. Last week, Naples, Joint Forces Command South, deployed for the first time in its history to Romania and Bulgaria to manage an exercise there to demonstrate that it has the mobility. We are setting up, as you know, an HQ, multinational core level in Stettin in Poland. Military planning also means that we are going to set up in the south a division level multinational headquarters to do the same thing, to do planning, strategic intelligence gathering, run exercises, and if necessary, conduct operations. At Sigonella in Italy, we are going to deploy at the end of this year the Global Hawks observation drones, which NATO is acquiring. 13 allies are buying these, and all of our allies is operating, which will provide a kind of joint information surveillance reconnaissance hub in the south, in Sicily, which will therefore be able to vastly improve our ability to see what is going on both in the Mediterranean and on land in this particular area. Gunnar has mentioned already that Turkey has come forward as to be the 7th framework nation for the very high readiness forces. Italy has agreed to be a framework nation for capability development, partnering with Albania, with Croatia, with Hungary, and with Slovenia in the region. But there's more that we have to do still. One element is maritime posture, and here I come to my second thing. It's clear that we are no longer looking at Mare Nostrum in the Mediterranean, or in the Gulf of Aden, to the extent we ever did, and certainly not in the Straits of Hormuz, or in the Black Sea. A few years ago, NATO more or less controlled the seas in its immediate vicinity, mainly because of the absence of anybody else. The Russians were in port. The Black Sea fleet never went anywhere, nor ever did the Russian Northern fleet. We know that that's changed. Just a few weeks ago, we had the first ever Russia-Chinese naval exercises in the eastern Mediterranean. We've got Iranian ships now entering the Mediterranean. We've got the Russians now operating in the Mediterranean, in the Arctic as well. They had a major exercise recently up there. Our Atlantic sea lines of communication are not the given that they were a few years ago, and we need to go back to making sure that they are secure. And of course we have in the Mediterranean, I mentioned of course with the Trident Poseidon operations, NATO's Operation Active Endeavour, the need to have a permanent presence to deal with organised crime, terrorism, migration, trafficking, and all of these other ills. But we're not well postured. For example, of our 4 current NATO standing maritime groups, only 2 are currently fully operational because of the problems of generating enough naval assets. Equally, the modern NATO naval operation has to have drones, both above sea and below sea, satellite observation, helicopter capability, Coast Guard, amphibious forces as well, as part of the mix, and maritime patrol aircraft, also of which we're very short in the alliance, to be able to also see the interface between the land and the sea. And this is something access area denial problem. In other words, the problem is a large number of countries acquiring standoff anti-ship missiles. The Israelis had one of their ships hit by a missile fired from Gaza a few years ago. This ability to actually maneuver close to coast, where ships can become vulnerable, is going to be an important element as well. Third rule of the road in dealing with the issues is we have to, of course, help these countries in the region to stand on their own 2 feet, to develop their own capacity. Defence capacity building in Brussels is now the name of the game. NATO, for example, just yesterday in Brussels, launched a new initiative with Iraq, which we discussed, of course, when our foreign ministers met here, Antalya, just a few days ago. We have a package now ongoing with Moldova, a package with Jordan, We're looking at Libya when circumstances permit. There will be other countries in the region. But clearly this is going to be extremely important that we have the money and we have the troops available on the ground with military liaison missions to help these countries spend their money in the most cost-effective way on the kind of forces that are going to help them to deal with these situations. And of course in Afghanistan it's vitally important that the Resolute Support Mission succeed, so that of course the Afghan forces, who are under a lot of pressure from the Taliban at the moment, as we've seen with the summer offensive, are able to keep security, notwithstanding the withdrawal of ISAF as well. The most important thing is where states are still functioning, even under difficulty. For example, in Jordan, the second largest city is a refugee camp. We've got to make sure that they continue to function. That is the precondition before we can even help or hope to help the states which are already in the throes of violence. There's also going to be a role for cooperation between ourselves and regional organisations. One of the more interesting things over the last couple of months that we've seen is countries in the region taking responsibility directly for the security, not leaving it to the United States or to the Europeans or whatever. Saudi Arabia has intervened with other Gulf countries in Yemen, of course. Egypt has intervened occasionally in Libya as well. A recent summit of the Gulf Cooperation Council with Egypt decided to establish an Arab force of 40,000 troops. Now, we see also the African Union having been very successful in pushing Al-Shabaab out of Mogadishu. Who would have thought that a few years ago? Financed by the European Union, logistics supplied by the United Nations, but African soldiers on the ground. But we've also seen a lot of fragility. For example, the UN and the African Union now under pressure to withdraw from Darfur, which I believe would be premature. So we see on the one hand a certain willingness to assume the burden, but we see also a need for hybrid operations where we provide the medical, the logistics, the evacuation, help with training, and so on, in a way that's already worked very well, with NATO transporting, for example, African Union troops into Darfur, or escorting World Food Programme ships. And the European Union, of course, is doing a lot of this as well, even more than NATO, with its security partnerships with a number of African countries. So we have to look at how we can create confidence with the Gulf Cooperation Council, how we can create confidence with the Arab League in the wake of our cooperation in Libya, so that, of course, their security role becomes constructive, of course, and also obeys international legal norms, particularly when it comes to the avoidance of collateral damage and all the rest. And NATO-EU cooperation in this respect becomes, as with every other dimension, increasingly important. Now, this brings me to Turkey. You were waiting for me to get to Turkey, weren't you? So here I am. Basically, we need Turkey's leadership. I often hear about we need American leadership. And we speak all the time in Northern Europe about German leadership, of course, particularly on the financial crisis and so on. We don't hear so much about the need for Turkey's leadership. Maybe you don't talk about it, maybe we don't talk about it either. But I think we need to start talking about it. Because none of these problems could be solved by Turkey without us. But frankly, we can't solve any of these things without you. This is crystal clear. The first thing, of course, is we need from Turkey the type of political stability that we have seen over the last few years. The precondition, of course, of leadership abroad is stability and economic success at home, and Turkey has had both of those in abundance over the last few years. The elections have been very interesting. As a fantastic exercise in Turkish democracy. I mean, I'm amazed that 20% of the Turkish parliament is now composed of women. I don't think even the British parliament or US Congress is composed of 20% of women. That is remarkable, with this broad representation, not just of society, but of different sort of ethnic groups as well. This, I think, has been a great signal to the rest of the world of how well Turkish democracy works. But going ahead, now if the new government is formed, or coalition or new elections, I don't know what's going to happen. Everybody's looking very intently. But whatever comes out of the electoral process, We need Turkish leadership in the following areas. Number one, the Balkans. Things are not going all that well in the Balkans. We've had some good signs, of course. The Pristina-Belgrade dialogue, facilitated by the European Union and Cathy Ashton. Unbelievable success. The Stabilisation and Association Agreement between the EU and Bosnia, which is finally now helping Bosnia to get on the road to serious reform. We, of course, in NATO have a very important rendezvous at the end of the year, where we are going to discuss Montenegro, potentially becoming a NATO member, which I personally think would send a strong signal to everybody that the NATO door is still open. But Montenegro, of course, mustn't rest on its laurels and has to meet the conditions. But we've seen some negative things as well, quite frankly, particularly if one thinks of the political crisis in Macedonia and the Kumanovo shootings and so on. There is still a lot of stagnation in the region. And clearly, Greece, with its economic crisis, is not in the position at the moment, perhaps, to play the role that we would have hoped it could play, until, of course, it gets over that crisis. Turkey has always had a very strong links in the Balkans, a very big supporter, a big participant in all NATO's operations. And I very much hope that Turkey, particularly at the moment, could continue to try to keep this region moving. We need Turkish leadership, of course, in dealing with the Syrian issues. That's obvious. This has been spoken about increasingly, and I'm particularly coming from the UK, I represent NATO. I'm very grateful for Turkey for what it's done recently to help us in the UK to identify all of these young people, tragically, who are being sort of persuaded that somehow, you know, the caliphate is some kind of utopia and a perfect egalitarian society, and off they go. I'm grateful for the good intelligence cooperation we've had now with Turkey in terms of the border in trying to help us to find these people and where possible stop them and send them back. But beyond this, of course, clearly the way in which Turkey is now working with Saudi Arabia and other countries of the region to try to support the moderate opposition, to train, of course, it's not, we don't have as many people in these moderate Syrian forces. This was spoken about a moment ago, as we would like, but at least the training program is getting underway, and Turkey is playing a key role there as well. So yes, absolutely, we need to, beyond the immediate crisis, have a dialogue with Turkey on how we try, it's not easy, but move the process in Syria forward to stop the violence and going towards a new constitutional elections. I agree with that totally. There may be also in Cyprus, who knows, an opportunity ahead. I dare almost talk about this because you remember the Annan plan a few years ago, which didn't succeed. It's frustrating business, I know. But we now at least have on the side of the Northern Cyprus with the election of Mustafa Kinci, and we have on the Greek Cypriot side with Prime Minister Anastasiadis, maybe an opportunity to move things forward, who knows, which would be a massive benefit. And if there is an opportunity, then we will need Turkish leadership to turn that into a reality as well. Even a few years ago with Armenia, which I know is another very complicated dossier, but in 2009 there was the agreement you signed in Zurich, the border was almost open. I understand the reasons why that couldn't go forward, but perhaps in future there would be opportunities as well. So wherever you look at the peace processes in this neighbourhood, to the Balkans, to the Mediterranean, to Syria, looking north to the Caucasus, the Turkish role in all of this is going to be key, and we need you to lead with our support, of course, as well. David also mentioned the energy issues, and of course in Cyprus now with the Aphrodite field, with the Israelis discovering Tamar and Leviathan, there's a lot of gas there. David says maybe we don't need all gas because we're using renewables, and of course we're using gas more efficiently. But if you imagine a hub in the future with Turkey's participation, because Turkey is an important factor in the distribution network for that gas, with Egypt sharing, with Lebanon sharing, with Jordan now benefiting, some Jordan industries are now for the first time being covered by gas that comes from the Tamar field, which the Israelis are opening. That is a massive economic boom for the reconstruction of the Middle East that we will have to engage in one day. So what I would like to say on Turkey is that beyond, you know, always what we discuss in Brussels, which is how do we sort of get ourselves out of the crise du jour or the immediate issue, we need, hopefully on both sides, to develop a proper joint vision, a proper strategic dialogue for how we can stop this great deterioration which we've been witnessing of late and start to turn into reverse. And I would hope also, speaking personally, that part of that would be a rebooting also of the accession negotiations between Turkey and the European Union, because I also believe that that should be part of the vision, both for you and for Brussels as well, notwithstanding the difficulties. So, Gunnar, in conclusion, I want to congratulate you because this Centre for Security Studies comes along at the right time, and you are the right person to head this, because you are a Turk who understands Western Europe and makes Western Europe clear to Turkey, but you also make Turkey clear to Western Europe. David spoke of connectors. He meant gas connectors. But you are a political connector, Gunnar, and a slightly more attractive one than David's gas connector, frankly. And I honestly hope that here at the university, with the new centre, you will lead intellectually, as I know you will, on all of these various topics, and provide we lazy policymakers with our bureaucratic mindset and sometimes tunnel vision with the necessary sting. Remember the Socratean gadfly, you won't mind me if I use a Greek analogy, the Socratean gadfly to stimulate us into original thinking and pragmatic solutions. Thank you very much indeed, and there is where I'm going to stop for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. You're exactly the right person to have at the end of the day. Because just as people are beginning to feel tired, you come in and you have this energy and you sort of re-engage us in such a way as if it's 9 a.m. in the morning all over again. And all that without the necessary stimulation of coffee. Now, I'm going to start off with a couple of comments and questions myself while the assistants collect some written questions, and then we'll turn to the floor for some open questions, which I'm sure there'll be many. And if and some of you haven't got questions yet, you can start thinking about those while this process is going. I'm going to keep this going until about 6:50, so that we can start the terrace forum just a little later and reduce the break a little later, because I think it's important to have this Q&A with Jamie. So, I mean, just listening to you, fascinating sort of landscape of all the challenges and things we need to do and what NATO is doing now. You mentioned defense capacity building as one of the new things that NATO is doing, and we actually hosted a preparatory workshop for the SMPC here in May, and one of the subjects was defense capacity building, which Allied Command Transformation brought in the speakers for that. It was a new subject for me, I must admit, and I learned a lot, and I was very surprised to find out how much civilian input there is into DCB. I thought it was a purely military training matter, and apparently it's not. So what are the requirements for more intensified cooperation with other organizations and agencies, but also with NATO partners and non-NATO countries, and learning good practice from each other and getting DCB out there? That was going to be my first point. It also seemed from your talk that you said, you know, NATO does three main things basically coming out of this. There's DCB, there's tackling organized crime, and safeguarding infrastructure and energy routes. Particularly, I'm talking about the South, because as you said, the East is an entirely different situation. If Mr. Putin were to change his mind, we wouldn't have a problem, but if any of the leaders drastically change their position in the MENA region, nothing would change. And I think that was probably one of the most important analysis and comments of the day, which really shows us how awful the MENA region is in many ways, that even if there was change in leadership in some places, we're not going to overcome these problems because they're so complicated. They involve demographics and lots of other things. And for that, how are we going to cooperate to tackle these things? And what came to my mind is that, you know, what can we do better as NATO allies to somehow work with other civilian organizations, agencies, to encourage political settlement in this region? Because if you don't have political settlement, and we discussed this, like in terms of, you already said, with leaders changing or not changing, it's not going to make much of a difference. Without political settlement, what good are recon drones, for example, if there will continue to be fragmented states in the south? So, I mean, we have all this equipment and things that we're doing, from active endeavor to, you mentioned the importance of maritime force. You know, NATO has a lot of know-how. It has a lot of, ability to do all of these things. And it has an ability to train partners as well. You mentioned, you know, working together with GCC and the Arab League. And I think, you know, this is something that NATO does well. We've already seen this in terms of how it helped with defense conversion in Eastern Europe at the end of the Cold War. But the things that we should really be talking with GCC and Arab League is long-term future visions. And, you know, how do we come to political settlements? How do we overcome instability and through political solutions, and use military tools as only a means to achieve that? So how do we engage partners for political settlement? And there, I mean, right at the end, you mentioned Turkey's leadership role could be really crucial in trying to forge long-term visions in the region with partner countries. And I think it's an area that neither Turkey or NATO together have tapped into, and I think this could be a new, reinvigorated area of cooperation in terms of trying to find a solution. And I agree with the long list of tasks you gave to Turkish leadership. The Balkans, Syria, Cyprus, Armenia, and energy transit routes.
Yeah, that's just for the sort of first year.
But I think the Balkans are, I mean, just to round off, very significant, because remember in 2009 when I was at the Woodrow Wilson Center, there was this talk about unfinished business in the Balkans, and it's still unfinished. That was a couple of years ago. And you're absolutely right, we're talking about soft power at this conference, and Turkey's soft power, especially in the Balkans, is huge, because I just finished about 2 years ago a British Academy project on Turkish educational NGOs in Bosnia, for example, and the work they're doing in peace and state building. And it's phenomenal. It's just one of those things that you don't really get to hear about too much, but when you're there and talking to people, you really see the impact of this. So those are some of my comments about Turkey and the Balkans, but my real question is, how can we get Turkish leadership working with NATO in political settlement and engaging GCC and the Arab League on long-term visions through the region?
Good, many thanks for that. First of all, defence capacity building, very briefly. It's one of these things, it's like development aid. Everybody's for it. It's very difficult to say anything negative about it, but translating it from theory into reality is extremely difficult. And as with development aid, a lot of money gets wasted along the way. So what we've got to do is, first of all, make sure, before we start, that we have a very clear plan from the governments that we're going to help, with some sense that they are buying into it. It's not a kind of concept that we're forcing down their throats, one that they don't really want and they're not going to implement, but it's something that where they really are agree with us that that's the model that they need for their security. For example, I remember a few years ago, we had an Afghan defence minister, Wardak, who came to NATO arguing that he wanted F-6 a lot of sense. So if I could express a personal view, I would hope to do so with Israel. Notwithstanding the Marmara incident a few years ago, particularly because of the interest in energy and so on, I would also hope that over time the cooperation might improve, particularly now that the Israelis have apologized.
I have some questions while I'm mulling through those? Can I get some questions from the floor? General.
Okay. Major General Sata, Deputy Commander in NATO Turkey here in Istanbul. Jeremy, first of all, nice to see you again. Great pleasure as always. I wanted to pose a question which derived from all what you said, because you magistrally depicted all the emergency challenges in the South. So that means that NATO is quite aware of what is happening in the South. But don't you feel that NATO is probably underestimating the threat to the southern flank? In terms of all the attention is devoted to the eastern flank to a certain extent. And because when we talk of the South, I'm looking at Libya, and Syria, and Iraq, and probably Nigeria, a transversal threat that we may call ISIL, and so on. And in this context, don't you think, and this question would have been for the ambassador as well, that Turkey, as the bridge from Europe to Asia, could have played a more influential role in marginalizing ISIS? Thank you.
General, thanks very much. That's a very good, fair question, if I may say so. My sense is that the South is as important as the East, and indeed that the problems of the South will be with us, unfortunately, long after, hopefully, we have managed with Russia to come back to some kind of, if not accommodation, at least a modus vivendi. But I think the problem has been twofold. Number one, if I can be frank with you, as I have to be with a military man, the countries of the East have been clearer in NATO what they want NATO to do. You know, as you see, we want American bases, we want repositioning, we want the exercises. They've been spoken as a group, and they've been crystal clear in terms of the message. And I would hope that from Turkey and the countries of the South, we would also have a clear sort of sense of, not just, hey, think about this, or, don't forget the South, but a more specific sort of set of proposals and suggestions about what is it that we want to see here. What type of command structure, what kind of NATO presence, what kind of exercises. Because, it takes two to tango. And don't always wait for the bureaucrats in Brussels to have the bright ideas. So we need that. Secondly, General, as you know much better than me, if you're at NATO, where you have a large military structure, and an issue comes along in basically a military form, it's a Russian tank and a NATO tank, it fits into the sort of the working culture quite easily, because that's what we do, right? Deterrence and large military things. It's a military problem, and we've got military capabilities. Of course, the South, as we know, is much messier. There is a military element, but it's less important, although still vital. There is an important civilian element, a comprehensive approach, as we've discovered on piracy, working with the private sector, the International Maritime Organization, the customs. All of these things are part of the mix of a successful policy. As you say yourself, sir, the partner element is key. And just if I may, coming back to Gunnar, one of the things that Turkey can help us with is with the relations with the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Remember, we were going to meet them in Antalya, but because of the timetable, you remember the White House meeting on Iran, it wasn't possible. But certainly I would hope that Turkey would make another attempt to put us together. So the solutions are more complicated, obviously, than they are in the East, and this has delayed, if you will, a little bit, the NATO reaction. I also have to tell you that our approach to the South will also depend on the quality of the NATO-EU dialogue. And the more difficult that dialogue, frankly, the less effective we will be, because we will not have this proper burden sharing that we need with the EU, which is already very much focused. For example, if you look at the CSDP missions at the moment, over 2/3 of them are focused in this area. But that is not an excuse not to have NATO do more. and as I said, to make the South catch up with the East. We need to get on with it and to define exactly what our role can be. For example, the maritime operations in the Mediterranean, you know, our assets, for example, in terms of maritime patrol aircraft, maritime situational awareness, the joint ISR, things that we have, could be very helpful to the EU, particularly if this becomes a long-term operation.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Could you identify yourself as well? I did say your name, but...
Memduh Karakulucu, President, Global Relations Forum, based in Istanbul. From your list of things to do for Turkey, two were omitted that caught my attention. One is the crisis in the Ukraine, and the other is Iran, the Iran situation. Now the first one, did you omit it because there isn't much that Turkey can do about it, or because there are sensitivities and you don't want to go there? Is that it? So that's the first one. And about Iran, did you omit Iran because Iran is sort of, quote unquote, big boys issue, the nuclear issue, in which case Turkey can be left on the side, although the implications and the repercussions of the final deal will, of course, be very important for us. So being a neighbor and being left out of this big deal matters to us. So how come we are omitted, Turkey is omitted from things to do? That issue is omitted from the to-do list for Turkey.
Okay, once again, fair question. In other words, what you say is perfectly reasonable and legitimate. My answer, number one, on Ukraine and Iran, I was looking at things where I was trying to emphasize Turkish leadership, the initiative and the key leading role. Not to suggest that Turkey has nothing to contribute or no interest, because on both of these you do. The first thing is I would like to say frankly that we appreciate Turkey's willingness to contribute also to all of these things going on up north in the east as part of the Readiness Action Plan. That's crystal clear. Because one of the points I often make, and Bill has heard me say this before, is that in NATO, if we break up into a group of the south and a group of the east, where basically the countries of the east don't do anything in the south and vice versa, we're going to be lost. I always sort of point to the French, this is just an example, who, notwithstanding Mali and the Central African Republic, have sent forces, these exercises in Poland and Lithuania, and even little Estonia has put a company in the Central African Republic in the CSDP operation there. So we basically, yes, definitely need this sense of this one big strategic theatre, even if there are two sort of focal points, and we all have to sort of support each other and not just say, sorry, I just do the East and the rest is your problem, because that would undermine NATO solidarity. Secondly, on Ukraine, there are certain things that Turkey can certainly contribute. One of the things that we're discussing in Brussels at the moment is that we've set up these trust funds to help the Ukrainians in medicine, sort of reintegration of retired military personnel. We've got one in cyber, which Romania, with Turkish support, that Romania has led. Turkey was also thinking of doing one which is extremely important for the Ukrainian government, how to talk to its people, how to communicate. Yeah, and we were talking earlier, with your presentation and your colleague about public diplomacy and Stratcom and soft power, and I very much hope that Turkey will sort of lead on that, because the Ukrainians really do need help, just in communicating with their own people, let alone the people in the East. And if they can't charm the people of the East back into a unitary state, then the soft power certainly isn't going to work. On Iran, good point. My sense is that for the time being, I understand that Turkey with Brazil a few years ago, you remember, worked out a way forward, but for the time being we are with the 5+1, which that's where we are. Is it going to conclude before the 30th of June? That's what, 5 days time in Lausanne, and come up with that. So, yeah, I really don't know, because those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know, and I'm definitely in the second category on this. But you are right, and your question is a very, very good question. Because beyond the deal, there are sort of two types of two theories. One is President Obama, an interview he gave the other day to Goldberg, said, my hope is that, once we have the nuclear deal and the sanctions are lifted, Iran is going to spend the money on its own people. It's going to satisfy all these pent-up demands of civil society for more prosperity, for better life, for trade. Of course, Turkey traditionally is a very large trading partner of Iran, of course. And of course, if Iran's energy opens up, the subject for David, Iran is what, the second, third largest reserves of gas, as well as oil, 6, I think, in oil. Yes, I mean, again, there's tremendous opportunities there. But there are a lot of other people in the region, particularly if you go to Israel, but not just in Israel, or in the Gulf Cooperation countries, who will say, no, Iran is going to use all this money to fund Hezbollah and Hamas and become, a proponent of Shia radicalism in the region. And it's clear that if we do not have an entente between Shia and Shiite, if Saudi Arabia and Iran still have these very difficult relations, if it's, you're in this camp or that camp. I mean, Iran is going to be an important regional actor after the nuclear agreement. That we know. But how we incorporate Iran into something which, again, like Russia, if not necessarily harmonious, is at least a modus vivendi where we're not in some kind of constant strategic competition like we have been, unfortunately, in Syria. The region is going to be very unstable. So there, yes, Turkey does take on a leadership role. Maybe not today, but down the road. Because you are probably one of the few countries in the region that are predominantly of the Sunni. I know it's not obviously something which has the same resonance, I know, as in the Gulf, but you are one of probably the few countries that could maybe mend what unfortunately looks like becoming an increasingly vexatious relationship of mutual suspicion.
I'm just going to finish off because I have one written question, and I think we skip it.
Is it a difficult written question?
Well, I think it's definitely from one of our students or staff from the Army War College, because it's a very military question. Okay. So I just reckon it's not from one of the Bachelor students. It says, you mentioned the importance of NATO expanding naval forces, but nowadays, SNM 61 surface group couldn't be activated for this period due to the lack of Navy ships. Yeah. NATO nations didn't allocate their own Navy ships. So what is NATO's plan to persuade countries to assign their units to this surface task group? We know that NATO works on high readiness response force. Do you think NATO also should pay efforts for standing maritime forces?
Yeah. They're very good questions. By the way, could I suggest that with your students you also ask them to write answers? That'd be really great. That'd be a great exercise, and we could look at the different answers and think, that one's a good one, I'll use that. There'll probably be copyright restrictions, but still, very helpful. Good question. It's been a problem in NATO for some time, and you've seen it in Operation Ocean Shield. We, at one stage, were down to one NATO ship in the Gulf of Aden, and sometimes the partners offer more ships than allies, which is again a reason to have good interoperability with partners and to keep those partnerships. What's happened? Well, I think in NATO the first lesson is to make sure that we really have a good mandate and a good mission, so that countries feel that if they're contributing a very expensive ship, then they're getting operational effectiveness. For example, these standing NATO groups, sometimes in the past were used for sort of goodwill port visits, to go to a country and show the flag as instruments of diplomacy. And some NATO countries thought, well, this is going to cost you several million pounds or euros to deploy this ship, and if it's just going on a goodwill visit to a port where I could send my diplomat, to give a speech and do the same. Am I getting value for money? Is the training, is the operational effectiveness such to justify it? Because ships are very expensive. An aircraft carrier, a gallon of fuel moves it 1 yard. We all know, I mean, ships are very expensive to operate, and so countries are going to be reluctant if they don't see that the training, the exercises are, the mission of very, very, very high quality. For example, I noticed, to be perfectly frank with you, that the European Union at Atlanta force in the Gulf of Aden had more ships than ours, and I think that maybe because it was sort of linked to rule of law, it was linked to, a mission on land to train the Coast Guard and so on. on. Countries around thought, well, you know, that I get more out of it that way. So I think in NATO we've got to make sure, you know, that we really do design our missions to make it attractive to countries. But that said, we also have to recognise that, you know, ships have disappeared out of the NATO arsenals. One problem is that, you know, you don't really want to send an aircraft carrier to do the job.